You're listening to the Balanced Educator Podcast, episode number 70.
Welcome to the Balanced Educator. We're your hosts, Kaylee
and Josiane from EduCalm. Our intention is to equip and empower you to feel more calm, balanced, and joyful in all aspects of your life. Hello and welcome to the Balanced Educator Podcast. In today's episode, we'll be chatting with Kelly Jackson from The Simply Organized Teacher, all about organization to simplify your life as a teacher. Kelly is a former second and third grade teacher turned classroom organization and management coach. She's always had a love for organizing and planning and setting things up. She started her blog back in 2016 to share about ways to organize her classroom and manage her students. She launched her podcast, Simply Teach, in 2018 to share more ideas and other great teachers with teachers. She has moved abroad to Germany for her husband's job, and she has been able to turn her passion of organizing and blogging and podcasting into her full-time job. So we are so excited to have her on. But before we dive in, we just want to thank you for being here. We are so grateful for you, for listeners that are new, listeners that come back. Thank you. And if you haven't done so yet, we invite you to subscribe to the show. All right, so let's dive on in to our interview with Kelly Jackson. Hi, Kelly.
Hi.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I am a current classroom organization and management blogger, podcaster, coach, whatever you want to call me. I spent 6 years in the elementary classroom. I taught second and third grade. I did my 2 years in third grade. I was self-contained, so I taught all the subjects. And then when I was in second grade, I was in what was called a dual language program. So I was teaching, all of my kids were either native Spanish speakers or native English speakers, both of them learning the other language. And so for there, I could only teach language arts and math because my Spanish is not very good. So yeah, I did that for 6 years. And then now I am working on my blog and podcast full time. Last October, my husband's job brought us over to Germany, which was bittersweet because it took me out of the classroom. I was ready for a break, but also it's hard to not be with your kids and to see them. I see pictures of them moving on and getting older and, you know, my teacher friends and things they're doing, and I miss out on that. But it's also been really nice to be living in a different culture and a different place and then getting to work on my blog, which I didn't say my blog name. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go right ahead.
My blog is The Simply Organized Teacher, and then my podcast is Simply Teach.
Okay, so tell me about it. Tell me about, like, you kind of explained what your kind of title is, but what does this mean? How do you do what you do?
Well, I have always had a passion for organizing, even when I was a little girl, not specifically in the classroom, just in general. I've always loved organizing and setting things up. And so I guess about 2 or 3 years ago now, I just started a blog to share ideas for organizing because I really felt like, you know, this is a gift that God has given me and I want to share that with people because the classroom, I personally believe that an organized classroom kind of sets the foundation for a successful classroom. I think that it's really important that teachers have an organized room, they have routines in place. So I just wanted to start sharing my ideas and resources with teachers. And then I've also started incorporating classroom management stuff because I also really enjoy the management side of the classroom.
Yeah, and like one of the reasons we wanted to have you on is because we recognize, and you know, our podcast is called the Balanced Educator Podcast, and we recognize that to find balance, you need to feel organized. Your external environment needs to feel good so that your internal environment can feel good. Is that something that you've noticed, that you agree with?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just ask my husband if he comes home in the house, or if I come home and the house is a mess. I can't do anything until I get it cleaned up or, whatever. And I think the same goes for the classroom. If I could not leave my classroom at the end of the day without putting things back in their home or straightening up my desk, because I wanted to be able to I wanted to be able to leave that day feeling, okay, like I'm done, and then come in the next morning and not feel overwhelmed with mess or stuff everywhere. And I think more importantly than for me, for the kids, I taught 7 and 8-year-olds, and you think about those little kids, and especially kids that have sensory processing disorders or anything of that, realm, coming into a classroom with just junk and clutter everywhere, it is overstimulating to my brain. So what does it do to a 7, 8, 9-year-old's brain?
Yeah, it could just be so overwhelming for both them and us, right? When the classroom is cluttered and there's things everywhere. So what I'm wondering is, how can we start getting organized in the classroom? What are small steps that we can take?
That's a loaded question, right?
I know. I'm like, is that too broad of a question?
Well, I think so. To answer, okay, I will answer your question, but before, I want to preface this with, you have to do what works for you. You have to be realistic to your priorities and to the time you have. I think people can get on Instagram or Pinterest, or even come to my blog and see a picture of like a really nicely organized area and get overwhelmed and think that, oh my gosh, I have to do it all right now and get it done and it be perfect. And I mean, it's never going to be perfect, right? That's something I'm still trying to teach myself. So you just have to take little bits and pieces of what you can do and work with that. One thing that I always tell teachers that I think is kind of like I call it my number one rule for organizing your classroom is everything in your classroom needs a home. I think one of the things that I notice teachers struggling with is they get papers in from the office, or kids bring something in and they just throw it on their U table or their teacher desk, and it just sits there and piles up. And then it becomes so overwhelming that you don't even know where to begin.
Yeah, or you don't even want to begin because of that, right?
Yeah, exactly. So since it's summer, and I would imagine that most teachers have packed up their classrooms, when you go back in the beginning of the school year, try to set up your classroom with homes for everything. Homes for student materials, home for student papers, homes for your papers, just everything that you like touch or come in contact with. Try to find a space in your classroom that's going to be its home. And I'm using air quotes, but I think if everything has a place to go, then when those papers come in from the office, you know exactly where to put them. Even if it's in a pile that's like, don't know what to do with right now, at least it's in a place versus just in a pile somewhere.
Okay, so if I'm coming in August, let's start with the teacher things, like the things for the teacher, not so much the like booklets and things like that students use. What is a simple way to like get organized from the start of the year when it comes to teacher things?
Well, the place I always like to start is after I've like laid out my classroom. So I kind of, real quick, if I can I go through like a classroom setup?
I would love it if you went through a classroom setup. So, please do.
I'll go through that and then I'll get back to your question. So the first thing I do whenever I walk into my classroom is I map out my room, whether that's on paper or I'm actually like in there moving furniture. I'm always thinking about my big important areas. So my whole group, small group, where my student desks are going to be, all those kinds of things. I get those things laid out. Then start putting things, unpacking boxes and putting them in cabinets. So for this, the question that you were asking about, like, how can a teacher come in and, do that? I organized my cabinets by like things. So cabinet A was all of my extra student material. So like extra glue bottles, extra crowns, whatever. Cabinet B was all of my resources for each of the subjects I taught. So then I would have within that shelf that was the teacher material cabinet, I would have a shelf for math, a shelf for language arts, and then all the resources would go in there. So yeah, that's what I would do for my cabinets: an art supply cabinet, a cleaning supply cabinet. So that's what I would do next after I started unpacking my things, put them in cabinets. Then I go to my teacher materials. My teacher desk is always what I like to start with. So again, like assigning themes to drawers in your teacher desk and using boxes or, those little like desk organizer things that you can get from IKEA, because again, that gives everything a home. The rubber bands have a home. The paper clips have a home. Yeah, I'm trying to like think through what my classroom looked like.
I'm thinking like all those papers too that you get from the office and stuff that you were mentioning that just end up like being stacked somewhere and you don't know what to do with them. How can you organize that? I'm asking maybe for personal reasons.
Okay, so, well, my file cabinet I had organized in 4 drawers. So the top drawer was like PD stuff, general classroom mumbo jumbo, whatever. And then I had a drawer for my math and language arts activities, a drawer for science and social studies, and then just like a catch-all drawer at the bottom. And within that top drawer, I would literally, as soon as a paper would come in, I would grab a manila folder, label it, stick the paper in there, and then stick it in whichever drawer was appropriate. And then, because I'm OCD, alphabetize it and all that jazz. So that way, all those things that were coming in, they immediately went into a space. You're talking about papers from the office at the beginning of the year. I'm thinking like all that stuff they give you on Meet the Teacher to give out on Meet the Teacher night, right? Like, is that kind of what you're talking about?
Also that, yeah.
So again, just having a space where, even if it's still a pile of all the papers that I need to pass out, having a spot in your classroom of, okay, this is where I'm going to keep all the materials that I need for Meet the Teacher night right here until Meet the Teacher night. So that way they're all together and I'm not having to like go look for them. And when something comes in, I just set it right there.
How do you feel, because you were talking about drawers and putting the resources in there, the materials, how do you feel about having it in paper form versus just online?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't keep paper copies really. I mean, when I say that my drawers were math and science or, whatever, language arts, I mean, they were maybe 10 to 15 file folders in there with 1 or 2 papers in each. It was not a lot. I think gone are the days where like I go and my friend, she's going to get so mad. I won't say her name, so she doesn't know I'm talking about her if she listens. I mean, she'll know, but nobody else will know. She has like 3 file cabinets. She's been teaching for, I think, 14 or 15 years. She has 3 filing cabinets and she taught kinder. So, of course it's like tons of paper and tons of cutouts, and I can never teach kindergarten, but she like kept everything from even 10 years ago. And I just was always encouraging her, you don't need that anymore. It can all be on your computer. But I think the danger is, if you're going to keep it on your computer, I think that's great. But the danger is when you don't organize that also. And then now you've got a file cabinet of crap on your computer, slowing it down.
Okay, so let's talk about that. How can we organize our folders really well on our computer?
So again, just every time, well, I always, of course, had like your general math, science, whatever subjects you're teaching, a file for each, or a folder, I guess is what it would be, a folder for each of those. And then within that folder, more folders based on the standards or the topic. Within that folder, even more folders if I needed. So I when you opened up my computer, I only have, 10 or 15 main folders, but everything just kind of gets smaller,
Yeah.
Again, you're giving everything a home on your computer. Just like I was mentioning, in your classroom, you want everything to have a home. In your computer, you want everything to have a space too. So then when you are, for example, teaching adding and subtracting with regrouping, that's where my brain goes, because second grade, and I go download something off Teachers Pay Teachers, I send it to the printer, print it off, but before I exit out, I save it to my computer under the math folder under unit 2, adding and subtracting with regrouping, or whatever wherever it goes.
Yeah, so it's just mostly just making sure we're not putting it in like this, like say, like you said, you're doing adding and subtracting. You're not just throwing it all in the math folder.
Right.
Just always creating those subfolders for each new theme or outcome or however you want to organize it. Do you find that saves you a lot of time?
Yeah, I do, because I know exactly where to go to look for something. I also, if I print off something, I don't necessarily save everything that I print off. If I print off a worksheet because I had a sub or I have a sub tomorrow and I need busy work for them, that's not something I'm necessarily going to save into my computer and take up space. It's only things that maybe packets or resources that I buy on Teachers Pay Teachers that I want to keep there. And another thing that I do, and I have a whole, I know we're in summer and teachers have already packed up their classroom, but I have a, I guess, PDF document on how to pack up your classroom at the end of the year, kind of starting even in like April. And that's one of the first things I do come April, May, is I then go through my computer. I go through each folder, open it up, delete whatever I didn't use that year, and then go into each subfolder and just go through there in 10 or 15 minute increments while the kids are working on something. And then just, if I haven't used it this year, I'm probably not going to use it next year.
Yeah.
And just get rid of it. Because you can download anything now again. It's,
that's so true.
You can always get it again.
That's so true. Actually, like here in Manitoba, we go until end of June. So it might be helpful for teachers if you want to share where they can find it.
Okay, so if you go to my blog, thesimplyorganizedteacher.com, what I would recommend is just going to the search bar and typing in packing up. And there's 3 blogs that come up that would be helpful. So the first one is tips on packing up a classroom to move. So this one I wrote whenever I was cleaning out my classroom to move to Germany and having to get rid of all my stuff. So that might be good for somebody moving schools or taking time away from the classroom. I've also got a podcast episode on packing up a classroom, and then the blog with the downloadable is called An Easy End of Year Classroom Packing List.
Perfect. So, love lists. Always so useful.
Yes, they are. And I'm a huge list person, so anything I can use to help me out, right?
Yeah. Kate, you briefly talked about subs, and I feel like this is a big struggle for teachers. Like, teachers hate prepping a sub, all of that, everything that comes with it, being away and coming back to, that dreaded note and all that. But on the organization side, what can we do to make that whole process easier for ourselves?
Well, I have to give credit to my friend Holly for this idea. She had a sub tub, and it was basically just a small little file box that I had a file for each subject that I taught. So I think the first file was like information or whatever. And in that file, I would put my sub plans and any notes that needed to go home or whatever for the kids. And then it was the subject I taught in order of how I taught them, or like what time we taught them in the day. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then within each file, I would just put the worksheets or whatever materials the sub needed. I taught the same thing twice. So usually I would already separate them for the sub with, this is for green group, this is for blue group, and it had the appropriate amount of numbers. I would even write little sticky notes on there, if I needed to say anything to them. And then when it came to actually writing out my sub plans, I just kept a generic template on my computer of I would bold the subjects and what time, and then just bullet point. I didn't leave super detailed subnotes, which maybe, was not always good, but I would just bullet point first, call the kids to the carpet and read this book, then send them back to their desk, have them take out their reading journal, then blah, 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 and just go through, go through each subject that way.
Did it ever happen to you where you were like sick in the middle of the night and you had to write a sub plan?
What I did during those times is I would just have kids do stations. So during the reading block, they would do their daily 5 stations. During math, they would do math stations. So at the beginning of the year, I would implement stations and I would teach the expectations and model them with my kids, but I wasn't necessarily meeting with my kids in small group at that time because I wanted to be walking around the classroom, monitoring them, making sure that they could handle it. So then when those times came where I did have to be out last minute, I could easily put in, they are going to do these stations. Such and such students are good helpers that can help you manage them. And by that point, the kids knew what was expected of them. So, sometimes when that happens, you just have to give yourself grace and the kids grace. And like, as long as they all end the day alive, then
yeah, totally. Sometimes you just got to let it go.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I knew I was going to be out, I tried to be more intentional with my plans and requesting substitutes that I knew I could trust to actually do the things that I left. But on those last minute days, stations, and that was about it.
But to be able to do that, you have to be very organized with your actual stations.
Yes.
So how do you organize them? This is actually like, I do a lot of stations in my classroom, but it's like, I find it's a bit of a struggle for me to keep it organized. Like it becomes a little messy for me, and I would love some tips on how you do things. I'm going to coach you a little bit here.
Because I feel like I keep talking me. So let's talk about you. What are your stations and what are the kids doing?
So I only teach French and math and health this year. That's it, because I'm there half time.
That's a lot.
Well, there's also sciences and social studies and ELA. And
Remind me you're in 5th or 6th?
I'm grade 5, 6.
Okay.
So for math, I'll do stations all the time. Like I'll do, whether it's worksheets or it's games that they're playing, and I'll put them in little groups, and I usually work with one of the groups. And then in French, I do like long centers. So they're working, it's basically a mini project that they're doing for 45 minutes to an hour. And then they have to present what they did after, and that holds them accountable. Mm-hmm. So I do it that way. But yeah, I just find it hard to stay organized with all like the papers and just everything, like it's just a lot.
Do you keep your stations like stored in one particular area of the room, or are they kind of scattered about where the kids go and do the station?
So I always keep the box, like I put it all in like boxes, or not boxes. Mm-hmm. What do you call those? I'm thinking of the word in French. Little bins. Yeah. Sorry.
Like I always use the little shoebox, like from Target.
Yeah. Something like that.
Question. Do you have Target in Canada?
We used to.
Not anymore?
No.
I'm sorry.
Do you have Target in Germany?
No.
Oh.
I was home in the States 2 weeks ago, and I looked at my sister and I was like, I just want to go to Target and walk around. I don't need anything. I just want to go walk around. Anyways, I got us off.
No, it's all good.
Okay, but you use bins.
So yeah, I'll place my centers in bins, and I write out the instructions. Mm-hmm. And before I even start them, I'll explain each station to all the students, so that at least some of them get it and they don't have too many questions to ask when they're kind of getting into it. And I just keep the bins like stacked somewhere in the classroom together. And then when it's time to do the centers, I call the groups and they take them, and then they move from one center to the other without having to bring the bins back. If you know, like, do you know what I mean? And that's mostly for math, because the French ones, they last so long that we only do one center per day.
Right. So the math stations, like, they take this activity and go to this area in the room, and then the activity stays there, but the kids rotate. Is that what I'm?
Yeah.
Okay. How often do you change out your stations?
So what I do is I'll usually have 6 stations. I'll explain all 6 stations, and then the kids will go through them. Once we're done, I'll explain 6 new stations. And often, not everything is new in them because it's things we've been working on already, right? So it's not like I'm explaining 6 brand new ideas and concepts, right? It's just like more the quick instructions on how to do each station. So yeah, that's how I do it. And I used to not do it that way. I used to switch them out often, but then I found that I would get lost in my organization of the stations, which is why now I do 6. I stop for a bit. I do 6 more. Does that make sense?
When you say stop, do you mean like you stop and don't do stations?
Yeah, like I won't do I just won't do stations for a week as I'm like teaching a new concept. And then 6 more stations based on this new concept. Does that make sense?
So a couple things. One thing you could do is, so I think I found it on Pinterest for math. It was math. M was maybe meet with the teacher. A was, I don't even remember. T was technology. H was hands-on. And the A, at your desk is what they were. So obviously meet with the teacher was like with me. So I only had 4 stations per se. And then the technology was usually pretty self-sufficient. They had a couple different things they could go to. So then I wasn't having to manage anything with that. The only ones that I was having to manage were the A and the H. Yeah, hands-on. And for that, I had, I think probably like 10 to 12 different games or activities that were in a bookshelf near the math word wall. And whenever they went to that station, they could pick any of those 10 or 12 stations, whatever, and work on it the whole time they were in that station. So then I was able to, I would keep my stations, because really my stations were those 10 to 12 games or activities. I don't like to call them games, activities.
That's a good point.
In rotation. One of my graduate professors always said that, like, we don't want to call them games. And so I always catch myself accidentally saying games, and it's true. So I try not to say it. But then I would keep those activities in rotation for 2 or 3 weeks, because we didn't do stations every single day. Sometimes they would even be in there for a month, 5 weeks, if I wasn't doing a lot of stations, because they would only go, I think I also had it set up where they only went to 3 rotations each time we met. So it wasn't even every single day they were going to those stations with the activities more than once. So there was a lot of room for movement and, variation for what they were doing.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And so did you only have 3 groups then, or did you separate them into more groups?
I only had 4 groups.
Okay, 4 groups total.
I had 4 groups. So I guess I had 4 groups, but we only went to 3 rotations. So that meant there was, like, every day I wasn't meeting with one group. So usually my 2 higher groups, I flip-flopped and met with them every other day. And then my 2 lower groups I was meeting with every day. I think that's how I did it.
And how did you manage that? Like, remembering who you're working with when?
I made a like a Google slideshow basically for each day of the week.
Okay.
And I spent so much freaking time making this stupid, because my brain could not wrap around like what you asked. My brain could not wrap around that. So I ended up making like a grid with colors, and it was like, okay, the blue group, and then I don't even know how I did it. I just mapped it out based on each day. And then whenever we did stations, whatever day of the week it was, I just popped up that day.
Okay.
And then the kids could see, okay, I'm an orange group. I go to this station, then this station, then this station.
Yeah, and that's an easy way to do it is just to, well, once you figure out how to show it, like how to write it out in a document, but then just projecting it, right? And the students learn to look for themselves where they are.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I like that. Especially instead of having to like say it out loud every time, like that gets old real fast.
Yeah, and that's not an effective use of your time.
Exactly.
Either,
Exactly.
If you're in, I'm assuming that you only have your kids for a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
Math.
Yeah.
So you're,
Yeah, there's a lot to get through. So it's more effective that way to have the visual. And kids are so visual. So it really helps. All right.
Yeah.
So
you don't have to deal with the questions of like, where am I going next? It's just.
Yeah. And if they ask, you can be like, the answer is here. Look for yourself.
Exactly.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about how to organize stations, but I would also like to know, how do you organize student papers? Because man, there's a lot of paper. I try so hard to be mindful of how much I'm printing and stuff just for environmental reasons, but I still find it's a lot. So how do you keep your students organized so that they don't lose things, or like, that everybody's mindful of the system and stuff?
So I get that question a lot. So if you're talking about organizing students, like what they have at their desk with them at any given time, I would have a folder for each subject, and that's where they would put all their papers that we were working on, or where they would write, for their writing journal or whatever. And then I also had I think I called it like their seat work folder. And that's just whenever we were working on something and they didn't finish it, it went straight into that folder so that it had a home for them to pull back out and work on.
That's a great idea.
Later on. And then when they were done working on their paper, I had turned in baskets. So I think a lot of what I'll tell you right now, and then if you read things on my blog, everything is based around routines and setting up routines for both the teacher and the kid. Because if you have homes for everything, then you can have a routine for everything. And you can teach those routines to your kids so that when you are out last minute and they have to do stations, they know the routine. So the routine I had for papers was, once they were done, they would turn it into their class's specific turn-in basket. Then at the end of the day, I had a kid who was their student job or classroom job was to organize the papers. So they would take all the papers out for their class and, put all of worksheet A, worksheet B together, all facing the same direction. I, like you, also didn't like to use a lot of worksheets. So I would do a lot of work in their interactive journals, or I just tried to stay away from papers, but it's inevitable. I mean,
yeah, sometimes you just, yeah.
You have to. So then I think even if the kid was like this classroom job person was a really responsible kid, I would have them like paper clip the papers together, and they would put them on my desk for me to grade. And one thing I had to learn was to free myself of the guilt that everything a kid did had to be graded.
Yes.
Because I don't think it does. And I think it can be really overwhelming to teachers to see this pile of everything that needs to be graded. And when am I going to get around to this? When am I going to have time to do this? If kids know that all of their work has the potential to have a grade for it, then they should, put forth their best effort. And you only select certain things that you want to grade. I cannot tell you how much stuff my kids did that would just end up in the recycle bin because I wouldn't get around to grading it. And then it's been 3 or 4 weeks since it. There's no point, I think, at that point in grading class. Now, if it's a test or, something that you're actually, checking for understanding and assessing, of course.
Yeah.
But if it was just some kind of worksheet that the kids were doing or something they were doing with a partner, a lot of times I'm a really big fan of Kagan cooperative learning. So I did a lot of Kagan structures, and there are activities within Kagan that are two students working on the same piece of paper, I never graded those because, I mean, I would check them to ensure that, so I could see where the kids were, but I never graded them because how can you hold one kid accountable for
Yeah, I agree.
grade? But anyways, once I would grade the papers that I did choose to grade, I would stack them back up and put them in. I had because I had two classes, two trays, one for each class. I would just drop them in the correct class's tray. And then the mail person, their job was to go and take the mail for their class and put it in the students' folders to go home. If it was something that, for example, when I taught second grade, I actually didn't have to give grades. Their grades were based on like a scale.
Okay.
But when I taught third grade, I did have to do grades. And, if they made below a certain grade, then I had to give them the opportunity to redo it. And that's a whole nother soapbox I won't get on.
Yeah.
But for that, I had a crate with my kids always had numbers. Everything operated off of their roster number, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. And if they did not make a good enough grade, I would just take that paper and stick it back in their file in that missing work or incomplete work crate. If they were absent that day, I would just, as I'm passing out the worksheets, I would go put it in their folder. So then when they came in the morning for morning work or came in or finished something and, had extra time to work, they could go to their folder and take that out, work on it, and then turn it back in, and it would go through the whole process again.
So then you use a lot like the student jobs.
Yes, I do.
So what are the jobs that you give, and how do you train them to do this independently?
I had a ton of jobs because I had almost enough jobs for every kid in the classroom to have a job at any given time. So, I mean, it was things from line leader, door holder, mail person. Oh my gosh, I cannot even remember all of them. I'm sure if I talk through my day, I would remember the jobs that I did.
It's all good.
But so the kids applied for their jobs, and that's not true. They did that the first couple years, and then you know how as you start teaching a little bit longer, you get less excited about certain things. And
Yep.
It's not worth all the effort.
You got
My first couple years, they applied for their jobs. I would read through their applications and pick their jobs. My last couple
That's
years,
cute.
when I had one class, it was manageable. When I had two classes, it was just one of those things that, y'all talk about balance on your podcast. You can't be a perfect teacher, quote unquote, and have balance. They don't coexist. You have to sometimes give up some things if you want to still be happy about teaching.
Yeah. Good enough is good enough. Done
Exactly.
is better than perfect sometimes.
Exactly. And I dealt with a lot of guilt when I decided I'm not going to do these applications anymore, because I felt like I was taking the student choice away from them, which I think is really important. But at the same time, I was going home on Friday nights reading through third grade job applications and sorting out that's how I wanted to spend my Friday nights,
Yeah.
So I switched to just a system where it was like a clip, and their clip just rotated down through, all the different jobs.
That works.
Yeah, it worked fine. And I would, again, just at the beginning of the year, I teach and model how to do every single job. And then the kids that get the job, I will, coach them the first couple weeks of school. So if Sally has the pencil sharpener job, then I will show her how to do that. And then she becomes the expert. And when the next person gets that job, Sally trains Benjamin how to.
That's awesome. And it gives them the chance to be a leader.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I had classroom jobs for everything. So yeah, that's how I handled classroom jobs. And then they got paid for their classroom jobs. And, so then there was some accountability there for, doing a good job.
I love it. That's awesome. Yeah. You make it seem really easy to manage all of that. I'm going to have to give it a try.
Well, The other big thing that I suggest is, so at the end of the day, the last 10 or 15 minutes when we were packing up, I would always say, clean up, pack up, stack up, and do your job. So they cleaned up their area, they packed up their backpack, they stacked up their chairs, and then they did their job. And so that was that when I left to take them to the car or bus duty or whatever, when I came back in from that, my classroom, for the most part, was how they found it when they walked in at 7:30 that morning. So you were asking what jobs I had. A library person would organize the library books and put everything back. The paper organizer person. There was a trash collector who would go around and pick up trash. You could have a kid that would, straightens the desk. I cannot stand when the desks are not straight because I would group all my desks together into tables. Ugh, it drove me crazy. So, they would straighten the desk up, and somebody to erase the board, somebody to change the daily helper and team captain, and just every little thing that I would need to do. So I would recommend to a teacher listening, think through what are all the things that you do when you come back into your classroom after sending your kids home. What do you do? Write all those down. Your kids can do a lot more than I think we sometimes give them credit for.
Yeah.
They can handle it.
Yeah, and it gives them that responsibility that it's their space too. Mm-hmm. It's not my classroom, it's our classroom.
Exactly. And that's why I was such a big advocate for them having ownership over it, and to be honest, if I was out for a day because of being sick or out of training or whatever, and I came back and the classroom was a mess, I left it. And when I came in the next morning, the first thing we did was they picked up the classroom and they put it back to how it belongs. Part of that is like me and my personality and wanting everything nice and neat, but also feeling like you made the mess, it's your job to clean it up. But also because that teaches them and that instills that ownership in them. And I think that that's something that is really important that we teach our kids more than the TEKS or whatever, is that we're teaching them those life skills about, being responsible and owning up to messes they make or whatever.
Yeah. And that's exactly our values as well. And I mean, we're very focused on mindfulness, but it's same thing, taking ownership for your emotions, for your own behavior, for how you manage yourself, right? It's all part of it. And I agree that it's more important in the grand scheme of things.
Right. Yes, exactly.
And I feel like that's the perfect way to end this episode. And I would love for you to share, you mentioned a couple blog posts, but where can we find you and connect with you?
Yeah, so you can find everything on the simplyorganizedteacher.com. I'm also everywhere on social media at the Simply Organized Teacher, except for Twitter. I don't do Twitter, so don't try to find me there. But Instagram and Facebook, I'm on both of those. I also have a course launching on July 3rd that is called Kickstart Your School Year. And it's basically everything that I think a teacher needs to set up and organize and manage their classroom, putting it all together in an online course that teachers can do, and then leave the course and walk into their classroom with a playbook, essentially, of what to do to set up their classroom. So I'm really excited about that. That's what I'm like, nose to the grind? Is that the saying? Just like,
I don't know. I'm French. Just kidding.
I don't even know if that's the right saying. It's just like,
yeah, that's awesome. And like a lot of our listeners are young teachers, right? Just starting out in their first couple of years. So I think that'll be really useful. So thank you so much for all of your tips and tricks for organization. Appreciate it so much. Thanks.
Thank you for having me on.
Love this episode. I always feel like I can improve my organization skills. Pretty organized as a teacher, but there's always things that I can do better with. And there's a few things that Kelly talked about during this episode that I cannot wait to implement in my own teaching practice. Now, if you enjoyed the show, we would love it if you left a review, because your reviews really help other educators to find this free content, and you can do so directly in iTunes. Now, for all the things that Kelly and I talked about, you'll be able to find the links that were shared in our show notes. So you can do that by going to podcast.educalm.com, and Educalm is spelled EDUCALME. Now, next week, we're really excited for this episode. We are sharing with you 5 visualizations that you can do to find calm whenever you're feeling stressed or anxious. And these will all be strategies that you'll be able to use with your students or your kids as well. So stay tuned for more. Next week, next Monday, this episode will come out. And in the meantime, have an awesome week.
Hey there, Balanced Educator. We understand the challenge and stress of trying to meet your students' diverse social, emotional, and academic needs. Thankfully, we found mindfulness, which helped us create a calm, well-managed learning environment, improving both our students and our own well-being. Teachers are busy, so we created an online bilingual English and French mindfulness program made especially for the classroom that is ready to use. No prep required. Just press play and enjoy returning to calm as you listen to the 5-minute guided mindfulness practices with your students. Then you can take the concrete self-regulation strategies that you and your students are learning into your regular teaching curriculum with our beautiful, inclusive printables. Thrive in a calm learning atmosphere. We want to set you up for success, so for a limited time, we're offering an extended membership to Educalm Classroom. Enroll before June 15th, 2019, and you'll have access to all the content until June 30th of 2020. This means you can play with the program this year and feel confident and ready to get started with your students right away next school year. We have 2 payment options to suit your needs. You can pay by check by emailing bonjour@educalm.com and we'll send you an invoice. Bonjour is spelled BONJOUR @educalm.com. Or you can pay online with a credit card by going to www.educalm.com/classroom. Educalm is spelled EDUCALME. So again, that's educalm.com/classroom. We're so excited for you to join our amazing community of caring, mindful, superstar teachers that are changing the world, one Educalm classroom practice at a time.